Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome to Debra and Peter are doing a podcast with me, Peter Wanless, and you, Deborah Alcott-Tyler. And how are things with you today, Deborah? Have you been busy, slaving away, running the Directory for Social Change?
Crazily busy today. I've had a million and one things to deal with. Strategic Oversight Group, which is part of the wider civil society group that we've set up, which is a wonderful group of people. And we were saying goodbye to one of our members today who's retiring, Ed Mayo from Pilot Light.
Oh,
that's very sad. And he said some wonderful things about, he's been involved in it since the beginning, or near the beginning, so probably 4 or 5 years, and just saying how incredibly valuable it was, how supported he felt, and how much he felt it had broken down the competitive barriers between infrastructure bodies who prior to this didn't necessarily get on terribly well and now get on a lot better. So so that was nice to hear him say that.
That's good. Well, I used to spend my Tuesday mornings, because this is when we're recording, Tuesday evening. I used to spend my Tuesday mornings doing things like that, being in meetings, writing board papers, that sort of thing. Now I spend them making chutney. I'm absolutely convinced that this kind of first 10 years of my working life in the Treasury has prevented me from wasting anything at all, and so I'm inundated with all these quints, and you've just got to do something with them. So this time yesterday I thought, right, I'm going to make some quince chutney. So as one does these days, I asked ChatGPT, how do you make quince chutney on an agar which is delicious for cheese? Now, I've never done anything like this ever in my life. But I got a beautiful set of instructions in an encouraging tone. So I nipped down to the Tesco Express this morning to get the missing ingredients. And in the course of the day, I've made 5 jars of chutney.
Wow, Peter.
So were I still in the NSPCC, then in about 4 to 6 weeks' time, when this chutney is ready, I could have put little ribbons on the labels, set up my stall, and sold them for charity, although it does taste quite good. So I might keep one jar for myself.
Well, it depends on how many quints you've got, because, of course, one of the other options you could do is you could go to your local farm shop and offer for them to sell it for charity.
I could do, yes.
You could, yeah. So you'll give them away for gifts as well, of course. That sort of thing's great for presents. But, if you want to give it away, go and say, and you can ask them to give it to NSPCC or a charity they choose.
Yeah. Well, I'm on a roll now with my chutney. So there's plenty more quince on the tree. We'll see where we go. But I do have to do, I was going to say some real work, but I do have to do some other more things which are more related to my previous career for the rest of this week.
I was going to say, any food producers listening in are going to be saying, producing food is real work, Peter.
Yeah. And it's a new skill, and it's given me a sense of kind of fulfillment. That's for sure. As indeed did attending the NSPCC annual council meeting.
Oh yes,
last
you told us about last week.
Yes, so I promised to share my badge, which anyone watching on YouTube will be able to see. There's the badge, and they presented me with a certificate.
Yeah, very lovely.
Signed by the current chief executive, which is a good thing, because a friend of mine ran a half marathon for the NSPCC 10 days ago, and they gave him a certificate, and it was signed by me. So, waste not, want not. They've probably got a great pile of certificates, which they're still handing out, signed by the old chief executive. So I said, well,
listen, charities don't waste anything. We'll simply reuse.
So that was good, and it was lovely to be back amongst so many supporters and just be one of the one of the volunteers who was present on this occasion. There's a lot of change going on at the NSPCC at the moment. It wasn't straightforward, probably, having me sitting there as a delegate, but I thought that, like so many things, everything's changed and nothing's changed, and you recognise the challenges, and it was fun to listen to the conversations and join in some of the table discussions and just be part of the movement for children. So it was a good day. There was one funny moment where someone asked a question from the floor. They had a panel of the trustees and the executive up the front, and he had this idea, and he said, "Don't you think this is a good idea? I pitched it to Peter Wanless once in the past, but he didn't like it. So I thought, there you go.
Did he know you were there?
Yeah, I think he did. But anyway, there we are. That is, of course, that is how I ran the charity, like an absolute autocrat, where any idea that came up, if I said it was good, it happened, and if I didn't say it was good, it didn't. But it was
why don't
amusing.
I believe that, Peter?
So that was my that was my end of last week, and I'm back up to London again later this week. But so
I'm up in London tomorrow at the Soldiering On Awards. I'm the co-chair of judges with General Richard Nugee, and we have our annual event which is very moving, which is veterans who've overcome big challenges. There's also those who have set up businesses and helped other veterans and things like that. It's a wonderful, wonderful evening. So that's what I'm up to tomorrow. Go on, I'll just cut across you. What
that's good. No, I was going to invite you to talk about your latest book or booklet, because you've got a new publication out, haven't you, which I saw has just been posted, and surely we ought to be plugging our own materials.
Yes, exactly. Well,
so tell us about that.
I will do, but just for the audience, for the absence of doubt, I don't make any money out of any of my books. Every penny goes to the charity, so I feel no shame about plugging it. So you'll know, Peter, one of my absolute bugbears is board paperwork, and the amount of boards I've sat on, or I've been talking to, or doing sessions with, or whatever, where the paperwork is just utterly dire. There's so much of it, it's incomprehensible. Like, really important stuff is lost in amongst a whole load of operational detail. There's so much detail in there, and then the chief exec and the execs get really pissed off because they say the trustees are over interfering in the detail, but they've given them the detail for them to over interfere in. So I just have a real passion about board paperwork. And I just got to the stage of thinking I'm just fed up of constantly having to tell people. So I've written a speed read, my latest speed read, which is about board paperwork, and which I'm going to be covering at our conference on Thursday. Well, this goes out on Thursday. So when this goes out, we will be in the middle of our governance conference, and I will have done a session about board paperwork around this book. So I'm super proud of it. It's not very expensive. It's a digital. We're producing it digitally only. I think it's $8.95 or something like that. So anyway, we'll put it in the link. But do go and have a look at the DSC website and track down my book on board paperwork, because I promise you, if you get the paperwork right, it transforms the quality of your board meetings. It really, really does. So there you go. That's what I'm plugging about board paperwork. Right,
and is the main headline that there's usually too much of it, or? It's the wrong stuff.
It's all the above. There's too much of it. It's the wrong stuff. It's badly presented. There's often about 10 or 11 different papers, all in different fonts, all presented differently. It's just a nightmare. The names of the papers are often rubbish, and the number of times you get the paper's called SPO 9/14/2. Yeah. And you've got no idea, what the hell am I looking at here? They don't indicate what's in them. They don't indicate what actions you're supposed to take as a result of it. Am I just supposed to read this and know it, or do I have to make a decision, or do you want commentary? Or we're so poor at telling trustees what we actually need for them. And the most important piece of paper from my perspective is the agenda. And so many agendas are just so poorly put together. And your agenda is basically, it's like your music sheet. Just like a sheet of music tells the musician what to play and what sounds to make, your agenda tells your trustees what music to make, what sounds to play and things like that. So loads of tips in there about how to get it better and how to make sure that it's comprehensible and gets to the key point. And also the point, it's like, you'll know, Peter, as chief exec, we chief executives, we get very frustrated when our trustees don't remember something we only discussed at the last meeting or what have you. But of course, as a trustee, I never remember what was discussed at the last meeting of any board meeting I was on. And so it's just about reminding the executive that your job is to support and advise and guide your trustees. And one of the ways of doing that is by making sure the paperwork's right. In fact, actually, my mantra is not paperwork, information. What trustees need is information. They don't necessarily need papers. Yeah. And there are many ways you can give them information in a way that lands.
Yes.
Look, I'm not going to read the whole book, Peter. I want people to buy it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what do you want to what do you want to achieve during the time that the trustees are together? Because, as you say,
exactly.
if you give them 150 pages of detailed stuff, that immediately makes me as a trustee feel rather suspicious. So I think what's hidden on page 147, or you find the kind of spelling mistake that's wrong on page 32, as opposed to having a conversation about
what
the
matters.
Question that matters.
Exactly. Yeah.
Anyway, okay, so you've got a conference on Thursday, and there's a book too that will be available. That's good. What else? I listened to lots of podcasts when I was going to and from London, and there's a really good third sector podcast. I mean, it's always good, and I think we can recommend other people's podcasts.
Of course, we can. We can, absolutely.
And there's the last week's was an interview with Laura Kerby, who I don't know. She's the chief executive of Prostate Cancer, who seemed to be doing extremely well as a charity. And I thought she was a really interesting guest on the programme, and they rattled through a number of interesting topics, but I see one of them has piqued your interest, because I've seen a message from you about it already, which was this campaign that they ran to target Black and minority ethnic men, because they are twice as likely to get prostate cancer badly than white people, and received a backlash as a consequence.
Yes, absolutely. So there was an article, I think it was in Third Sector, that I read, and I was just so upset by, actually, and about how apparently they'd had quite a lot of people saying they were going to cancel their direct debits to prostate cancer, or not give any more, because because it was racist, and they were targeting black men and they didn't care about the health of white men, which is just utterly ridiculous. I mean, there are a number of things I think about it. Half the time, the people who write that stuff into charity are just dicks, basically. It's like, they're just being utter dicks, and you just have to ignore it. And the other thing is that it's always been my experience that people who threaten to cancel their direct debit never had a direct debit in the first place. I mean, there's an awful lot of, outrage from Tunbridge Wells. I will never donate to this charity again. And you think, I bet you've never donated anyway. So, but I just feel, I think, the way things are at the moment, we've got to constantly stand up and challenge and point out those things that are awful. And in fact, in the comments on my LinkedIn post, there was at least 2 people who've said, thanks for sharing this, and I've now donated to Prostate Cancer UK. So, it makes me think of, it was the RNLI, wasn't it, when they had that horrible, you should not be saving people in boats.
Yeah.
You're for British people. And they said, and we're going to cancel our direct debits. And the RNLI just came back and said, our purpose is to save lives at sea, but end. And they got, I think I remember they got a massive upsurge in donations as a result of it. So there's also something to be said for us when we highlight those awfulnesses. Often what you get is good people coming together and saying, right, I'm not having that, I'm going to donate, or I'm going to show my support, or I'm going to be more sensitive to it. So, yeah, well, I'm glad she was impressive. I'm not a podcast listener, but...
she was rightly unapologetic about following the evidence and doing what needs to be done to improve men's health, and with the outcomes for black men being so much worse than for white men, that led obviously and inevitably to a targeted piece of communication. So that was good. But they had a very interesting bit of the conversation where they talked about Prostate Cancer's partnership with Paddy Power, who will not be everyone's cup of tea, and are a pretty aggressively promoted gambling company, but have raised a lot of money to support prostate cancer's work. So there again, she was, invited to comment on, how do you feel about the ethics of lining up with this company when you've got colleagues in the charitable sector who are doing everything they can to address this kind of scourge of many addicts' lives, and which is gambling as a consequence of companies like this. So I don't know how you would feel about that one, but again, I thought she took a clear and principled, one might say, narrow approach to my job as the chief executive of Prostate Cancer is to improve men's health, and I will do what I need to do that. And so long as this company, which is operating in a regulated sector, is not breaking the law and doing doing some things to address responsible gambling, then that was okay. But that's a bit of an acquired taste there, and there's a sort of spectrum, and the trustees have to discuss these things probably, don't they?
They do, except that what she's doing is actually entirely and properly and rightfully within charity law. So charity law says that you cannot turn down donations unless you've got a really, really good reason for doing so. That it's going to damage the brand or reputation of the charity, that, the person donating's got a dodgy background. I mean, it's actually not that easy to say no to donations in charity law. You're supposed to accept them. And she's absolutely right. Her job is men's health. If she was working with a gambling charity, then that might be different, but she isn't.
Yeah, it depends how you define health, though, doesn't it? Because some people are extremely unhealthy as a consequence of their gambling addiction.
That's true, but that's about mental health or other kind of possible physical health issues. Her job is prostate cancer, just as your job was children. Your job at no point, Peter, was it adults. Your job at NSPCC was children. And so I personally think she's done the right thing. I mean, personally, I find the whole gambling thing really icky. And I think that lots of gambling companies do charity wash because they're not the only ones. There are other ones. I think Bet365, the owners there, I don't think Bet365 do it, but the people who set it up and owned it, who are billionaires, give away like literally millions to charity, profits from gambling things. So I'm kind of with you, but gambling isn't against the law. Neither is drinking, neither is smoking, neither is skateboarding, neither is riding an electric bike, neither is going on a motorbike, neither is abseiling, or do you know what I mean? In other words, if it's within the law, just because we personally think those things are bonkers things to do, it doesn't, so I think she's right there.
My mum was 100% anti-gambling, and I'm not sure what she would have made it being the chief executive of the big lottery fund. But she never lived to see that. So there we are. The other thing which Laura said, which I thought was a very powerful point, was in order to improve men's health and create awareness and understanding of what you need to do to prevent prostate cancer, you need to engage with men where they are. And lots of men are
in betting
at the
shops,
bookies or online gambling and this sort of thing. So it's a natural place to associate the message. And she spoke in a very good way about listening to men in the way that I would have talked at the NSPCC about listening to children and young people. Everything starts with your beneficiaries. And so in the case of prostate cancer, the beneficiaries are men, particularly men who could be at risk of poor health. And where will they be? In the same way as we would have discussions at Childline about should we be promoting Childline on TikTok and these. So anyway, it's a good interview. I recommend the Third Sector podcast. I recommend listening to Laura. As I say, I've not met her before, but I thought she was great.
Well, she sounds awesome. I don't think I've met her, but now I really want to.
But talking of men, there was another thing which I found very interesting online earlier in the week, which was something which Polly Neat put up. So Polly, as many people will know, is the former chief executive of Shelter and Women's Aid, and she was having a go at men in male and female podcasts who are disrespectful to their female colleagues and talk over them and interrupt them and mansplain their ideas. And I thought, oh my goodness, I wonder if that's, I mean, I wouldn't presume that Polly listens to our podcast on a regular basis, but I suddenly thought, oh gosh, whether or not it is, that could be me. And I just don't know. But she was quite trenchant about how the men that she was calling out here, although she didn't name any names, were people who would like to think of themselves as allies. Of women.
Well, it's so interesting because the first thing is, because I read Polly's article, very well written as always. I mean, I'm a massive fan of Polly Neat. I think she's an awesome human being. But actually, it's really interesting because we hear things differently from when we're in the conversation. So you and I have known each other for a very, very long time. And if I'm absolutely honest, I think I cut you off more often than you cut me off. I think I interrupt you more than you ever interrupt me. And I frequently will blatantly say, well, you're wrong, Peter, or that's absolute nonsense, Peter, which you would never say to me. You would never say you're wrong, Deborah. You'd say, perhaps there's a different perspective. So I suspect that we've known each other so long and such a long time that I've never noticed that. So it doesn't seem to me that you do that to me. I've never experienced that. But that doesn't mean you don't do it or the people hearing it. But what it made me think about, Peter, was like the particular pressure that white men who are perceived of having privilege have, which is to be very conscious of their whiteness and their privilege. And I think that's fair enough, because I think I have to be conscious of my privilege as a white person and, the other privileges I have. But it reminds me of I don't think I told you this story about my uncle, Will. So we were at a family party a few years ago and we were chatting away. And I said that when I stay away in hotels, I never, ever have dinner in the hotel restaurant or go out to dinner on my own. And he said, well, why? And so I said, because as a woman on your own, you're not left alone. Somebody will they're not always like trying to chat you up for sex, although often they are. Sometimes they're just a bit lonely and they think, she's a woman, she'll talk to me, because women do. And you're just pestered relentlessly. And I absolutely hate it. So I would always stay in my room. And if they didn't do room service, I'd go to the nearest shop or the local garage and get a pasty and a packet of crisps and eat it in my room. And he was saying and his response to that, well, that's ridiculous, Deborah. It must be only you that happens to, because I've never noticed it. I've never seen that. I've stayed in loads of hotels and I've never noticed women being pestered by men. And I said, well, it's not just me, although I'm very flattered that you think that I'm so amazingly attractive that I'm the only person this happens to. Happens to me less, of course, now. I'm in my 60s and, not as youthful as I was. But anyway, about 6 months later, we were at another family party. He lives in America and he came over from America. And he said to me, Debs, can I just talk to you about that, dining alone thing? And I was like, yeah, okay. And he said, you're absolutely right. He said, ever since we had that conversation, I've been looking. And he said, and I've noticed, and he said, you're absolutely right. If ever there is a woman on her own at a bar or in a restaurant or, a table, you can absolutely guarantee she'll be approached by a man, at least one man, if not more in the night. And what I was really pleased about was he dismissed my experience because he'd never observed it. But when I shared my experience with him, he then started to notice, and now he knows more, and now he knows himself to behave better. So I think that even though I don't have the same perspective Polly has about you and me, but that's not to say she's talking about us. No. She may not be. So, and very, very big-headed of us to think that she would write a whole article completely. About it. But nonetheless, I'm not conscious of it. But it's also quite good to know, I think, to be reminded of that message, that lesson, that, we white people in particular, and white men especially, do have to be super aware and alert of how we're behaving, because often we just haven't noticed it. So we carry on doing stuff. Does that make any sense?
It does. And yeah. I didn't presume when I read Polly's thing that it was about you and me, but it did make me think.
Exactly.
I honestly don't know if I do talk over you and finish your sentences and repeat the points that you have already made to everyone else again. So after I'd listened to the Third Sector podcast, I listened to our podcast last week, and I felt confident and comfortable and happy that that wasn't how I was behaving, at least in the episode when we were together. But it did make me think it's perfectly possible that I could behave like that, because I have definitely experienced men talking over me and not letting me finish my sentences and making the same points that I feel I've made in a louder voice and in different words. So
you know what it feels like.
Despite not being a woman, I can recognise that feature, and I know what it feels like. I know what it feels like to be a woman, but I know what it feels like to have my points kind of reinterpreted by someone else. And I can imagine that it would be perfectly possible in a unequal power dynamic, which I am engaged in all sorts of situations, for me to be mansplaining to junior people about simple safeguarding concepts and also, these sorts of things.
But not us, you see, because that's the other thing, because you have a very different experience to me, and you have met an awful lot of well-known people, and so your stories are super interesting, I find. And so, whereas my experience is more limited than yours in terms of the voluntary sector, but I don't feel less than you, and I never feel that you ever treat me like you're less than me. And in fact, you yourself will be the first one to say you frequently ask me for my views and my opinion, and occasionally you ask me for some advice about how to handle a situation over the years. So, I'm very comfortable with our relationship. And anyway, Peter, it's me. You know damn well if you had the temerity to dare to steal my stuff and put it in your own words, damn well I'd be straight at you for it. So,
well, and you'd have every right to.
Yeah, but it's good that she raised it, because it is really important for us all to think about it. Even just as chief executives, the fact of being a chief executive, whatever colour you are, whatever sex you are, is leading you to being in a position of power over other people, which means that you're likely to be listened to more. You interrupt other people more. People tend to take you more seriously than they ought to. And so we have to be conscious of that power that we have just in a job title, to make it safe for people to say, please tell me if you think I'm wrong. I promise you I won't take it personally. Or, if we have a debate about this, it is just literally a debate, that sort of thing. Or even genuinely saying to somebody, it's your decision. And if you make the wrong decision, I will back you up.
Yeah.
It's like we have to be super conscious to give that stuff away. So I thought it was an interesting piece. I thought she raised some really useful points and got us both thinking and talk about it.
Although disappointingly unspecific, because I would like to know who the people are that
she's not
calling
she
out.
Never
because
do that.
No, but if they don't know,
it gets a pile-on.
If they don't know, they won't change. So hopefully there's a way of alerting them to this, because it may not be conscious behaviour.
Knowing Polly, there's a very good chance that whoever it is that's fallen within her eye line, she would, if she knows them, she would say, look, I've noticed this. So I think it's probably a general point. But anyway, it was very useful and gave us something to talk about on our podcast.
And certainly this business about as you rise up an organisation, people listen to you rather more than they did before. Not always for good reason.
Yes.
I remember being on a event when I was at the Department for Education. This is years ago. I think I'd just become a deputy director, and it was one of these kind of creativity workshops. And to get us warmed up, they split us into two teams, and we needed to communicate a message from one side of the room to the other side of the room. And you had the message on a piece of paper, and you had 10 minutes to convey what was on the piece of paper to the people on the other side of the room. The challenge was something or other like that. And anyway, so I was very loud and influential in trying to work out how we were going to communicate with our hands and our faces and all this kind of stuff, what was on the paper. And of course, all you needed to do was to screw the piece of paper up, throw it to the people at the end of the room, and they could pick it up and read it. But if anyone had that idea, it was stifled by my leadership, which took us down 2 or 3 completely different routes. Whereas if we'd just kind of taken a breath and listened to one another and got everyone's best idea of how to address this situation. And that was the point they were trying to make, really, that you can overcomplicate things and you need to engage and involve everyone in the group.
What this makes me think of, Peter, do you watch The Traitors, and are you watching Celebrity Traitors?
Yes.
Well, me and my partner accidentally watched the previous series. We were always very not watching that nonsense, So we didn't see the first 2, and then we accidentally ended up watching, I can't remember why, but the last series 3, and then got completely addicted. I mean, my partner, who'd been very sniffy about it, literally was shouting at the telly, don't say that, or what's the ridiculous thing to do, or what have you. Anyway, so we've been watching Celebrity Traitors, which we're loving. But of course, you see that so much in there, the power of groupthink, the way people just, they take away their own misgivings. They don't really say very much. I mean, I think about Joe Marler, who's absolutely nailed Jonathan Ross, but nobody is listening to him because they're all going along with that. I find it utterly fascinating because I think there's so much in it that reflects how we are at work. And it so often makes me think of, how often does my voice override everybody else's voices just because I'm loud and I'm enthusiastic, and also because I learned years ago, starting my career in the 80s as we did, Peter, fighting my way through the desperately awful sexism at the time. I was taught by somebody to always say, not to say I've had an idea, but to say I've had a brilliant idea. I've had a fantastic idea. Whereas most women will say, this probably isn't a good idea, which immediately sets that probably not in people's heads. Whereas if you say, I've had a fantastic idea, I think it's a brilliant idea, how about, we try that with enthusiasm, it's more likely to be adopted. But I've been practicing it for so many years and so skillfully that now, even if the idea is really shit, just because I've said, I've had a brilliant idea. People do it. So I have to be really conscious of how I express my enthusiasm for my own ideas now, because now I'm at the top of an organisation. I don't think I need to say that anymore in quite the same way, because they're going to listen anyway. So, yeah, it does really make you think.
People get used to your behaviours, don't you? Again, this is another. I've taken myself back to a kind of moment in time when I was a middle manager in the Department for Education, and I had my first 360 appraisal, and I got some feedback, and it was lots of lovely feedback in it. But one of the things which was suggested was that I perhaps was trying to be everyone's friend, or I could be a bit more ruthless in calling people out when they weren't doing what I wanted or needed them to do. So anyway, we gathered in a group, and I was supposed to be sharing my feedback with the group, and I began the meeting by saying, right, which one of you bastards said that I wasn't nasty enough to all of you? And honestly, they all jumped and looked really shocked and
so they didn't realise you were being funny.
No, because it was so out of character, because I shouted and I lost. But it was so it was a piece of fun. But actually, I did learn something from that feedback, and as well as that feedback, I learned something from that moment, which is that if I have an upset or kind of cross word, it doesn't take very much. If you're one of these people who's always shouting and losing your temper, you just get louder and louder and louder, don't you? And it washes over everybody. Whereas if I'm cross, it doesn't take very much for people to realise that I'm cross. So a bit like I've had the kind of fantastic idea. If I say I'm a little bit upset about this, people think, oh God, he's terribly upset.
It's that British thing, isn't it? You know, I'm a bit miffed really means I'm absolutely fucking furious and you're in for the chop, you know. Or it'll be all right, you know. It's like, you know, it's very funny. Anyway, I think we've run out of time, Peter. I could talk for ages.
There we go. Well, it's lovely to see you again. Have a great week, and see you again next time.
See you again next time. Go quinceing. Go persuade the farm shop to sell your jam to raise money for the NSPCC, Peter.
Oh, I didn't even talk to you about my quince jelly. That's a whole other story.
Well, let's discuss quince jelly next time. All right, everyone. Thanks for listening. Bye.